Hello, I'm Lisa Floyd-Hanna, the Science Director for the Natural History Institute in Prescott, Arizona, and I'd like to talk today a bit about the fire ecology of some of our Southwest ecosystems. So we tend to hear a lot about fire these days, and it's not all good. Fire is a destructive force that, particularly in dry, hot years like this year and last year, tends to wreak havoc on communities. But if we take a step back, we can remember that fire is part of the natural disturbance pattern of many ecosystems. The pattern of fire, the frequency, the severity varies for each ecosystem. So one really has to understand what the fire pattern was before this recent climate change, or before human disturbances became so great that the vegetation changed. There's as many different kinds of fire regimes, as they're called, as there are vegetation communities. We are standing here in the interior chaparral, Pinyon juniper interface in the Mogollon Highlands of central Arizona. And here, the fire cycle very likely was relatively short. About every 35 to 40 years, and a large landscape scale area would have reburned, taking out all the vegetation and allowing resprouting species to sprout and seeding species to ultimately return to that environment. Pinyon juniper woodlands, which are near these chaparrals, have typically a much longer fire cycle, where their fire return intervals tend to be measured in the hundreds of years rather than within decades. So the expectation in those ecosystems is that they will develop during fire-free centuries, develop from woodlands into forested types, and then ultimately burn in a stand replacing fire. There are pinyon juniper fire cycles throughout the West that have been documented to be anywhere between 200 and 600, or maybe even longer, years between fires. On the other hand, we have many Western ecosystems that have developed with a very short, light fire cycle. And we hear a lot more about this kind of an ecosystem because, for example, in ponderosa pine, those ecosystems have been replenished by having surface fires running through the areas on 1, 2, 3 year intervals, very, very frequently. But those fires are light enough that they don't necessarily get into the crowns and don't burn all the vegetation, but rather take out the smaller trees and the grasses and the forbs in the understory, so creating a more open kind of environment, and the trees actually benefit from the nutrients coming in from fire. So depending on whether it was a stand replacing fire cycle like this or a surface fire type regime, ecosystems have adapted to the kind of disturbance that they most frequently encounter. One of the problems today is that with climate change and human-caused changes to landscapes, that we're actually seeing that fires are changing in their character. So ponderosa pine fires, which typically had been a surface fire, might now become a stand replacing severe fire, such as we're seeing in parts of California this year, and that is particularly threatening to those ecosystems because they won't return in the same pattern that they had before, as it's a different fire cycle. So fire in general can be a great thing. for ecosystems. It has been part of most of our western ecosystems at different character, intensity, and timing. But we have to keep an eye on that because today those fire patterns are definitely changing. All right, I appreciate your attention. Thanks for listening today. And I'd like to direct your attention to the Natural History Institute's website. And if you're interested, you could hit the subscribe button and learn much more about our natural areas in the Mogollon Highlands and elsewhere. That's naturalhistoryinstitute.org. Thank you.